Have you ever created code that is so beautiful, elegant, and functional that it feels like you've created a masterpiece, something that belongs in a museum, only to look at it a week later and think that it looks like that steaming pile of garbage that you saw set on fire behind your local Wendy's? Well, this series is going to teach you how to have that happen a little less often. Welcome to How to Suck Less at Programming. Okay, so the first topic I wanted to go over is why you should avoid generic variable names. And for this example, I went ahead and created this class coffee, which has a member variable name, which is of type string. Also, I went ahead and created a function getNamesOfCoffee, which has a parameter a, which is of type array of coffee, and then it returns an array of strings. And this function is quite simple. All it does is creates a new array of strings and assigns that to list 1. We then iterate all of the coffees in the parameter a and push the member variable name onto list 1. And then once it's done iterating a, we go ahead and return list 1. And at first glance, this function seems perfectly fine. However, if I were to go ahead and show you my example with better variable names, it reads much, much better. So in this example, A is now types of coffee. So now when we see the iteration of types of coffee, it's less ambiguous than A. We know exactly what we are iterating. Additionally, instead of, let me go ahead and comment that out real fast. Instead of X inside of our for each loop here, we then go ahead and call it coffee. So we know exactly what we are accessing here to know that, hey, coffee has a member variable name. And then we're pushing that onto, instead of a list that's called list 1, which is ambiguous. Let's say you have a use case with multiple lists. You might not know what list 1 is. So this is very explicit, and it shows you that our array of strings are in fact names, and then we return this. So the next topic I briefly wanted to touch on is why I think you should avoid using abbreviations in your code. And for this example, I went ahead and created a class called the fastest espresso machine, which simply has a function brew, which outputs the following text. And then I also created a class called the flexible espresso machine. What that is, no clue, honestly. And then I went ahead and newed up a new fast espresso machine and assigned it to the variable fem. I then went ahead and created a variable no, which represents the number of coffees, and assigned the value 20 to it. I then iterate 20 times per no and brew 20 espressos. And why I think abbreviations are bad in this context is, let me show you, is we have a flexible espresso machine and a fastest espresso machine. They both have the same acronym FEM, so it can become ambiguous in your code what you're actually referencing. And additionally, if we look down here, we just have fastest espresso machine. We now no longer have a need to put comments in our code, which in my opinion looks much, much better. So these functionally do the same exact things, but are a ton less ambiguous. And honestly, topic 1 and topic 2 can just simply be boiled down to never be ambiguous in your code. Never let your reader guess what is actually happening. The reader should always explicitly know exactly what is happening in your code. This brings us to the third topic I wanted to go over, and that is why you should avoid using reserved keywords in your code. And I don't mean something as obvious as don't use like the name for as a variable name because there's for loops. I mean, if a object is an object, don't use list or array or map or dictionary in the actual class name because it becomes ambiguous. And for this example, I went ahead and created 2 different classes. One that has product name, which has or product info rather, which has name and price in it, and a product list, which has a category name and products inside of it. And for this example, I went ahead and created 3 different instances of product information. The first one having smash that like button in it, which reminds me, if you guys haven't, please like this video. It helps me out a ton. And then I have subscribe for less Garbo code. You guys know the drill. And then I have one that says totally not addicted to coffee. I don't know why I put that in there. I really don't know. And then, so I made a list of products, which is an array of type product info. I then go ahead and push on our 3 product infos we created up here into this list and create a product list object from that list of products. And if you guys haven't figured it out already, the thing that is ambiguous about this is we have an array of product info, which is called lists of products, and then we have a product list, which is a product list. If the code base grows and there's more complex functionality here, these two variables can become confusing to the reader. And touching base back onto what we previously said, never be ambiguous in your code. And using reserved keywords in any variable name, including classes and functions and whatnot, can become ambiguous to the reader. So something to avoid, just keep an eye out for that one. And the fourth example I wanted to briefly go over is why your variable names should show logic. And for this example, I went ahead and created a simple class product, which has a member variable name, which is of type string. And I created an interface called product factory. You could also call it an abstract class in TypeScript, and an abstract function called create, which returns a product. And then I have some implementations of that interface here, the coffee factory and the sock factory, which both implement the create function from our abstract class up here. And these are quite simple. You can read it. It just calls the constructor and returns a product with a different string. Likewise with that one. And then I have a function that utilizes our interface product factory here. That way we can use either the coffee factory or the sock factory as an argument or parameter in this case. And this function is quite simple. All we do is call the create method, which returns the product, and then our function then goes ahead and returns the product. And one thing I really want to note here is our interface never, or rather does not have a I prefix or a interface postfix. And the reason I don't like doing that is because the dev doesn't need to know this is an interface. They only need to know that it has a create method on it and then the return type of it, which is product. Because our interface has it declared up here, we already know that. We don't really need to know what's happening underneath the hood in our instances of that, or implementations rather, of the interfaces. And then if you come down here, we new up both factories and then call the methods. And the thing I wanted to go over here is these classes rather should have factory in the name. And the reason I like doing that is if a developer ever reads this code, most developers that understand patterns will know what a factory is. They know how to use it. So it's nice when you're reading code to actually get that little hint like, okay, the thing we're doing here is we're using the factory pattern to create objects. And that's really all I really wanted to go over is your variable names should show logic or the pattern, or actually like be demonstrating what the use case of that piece of code is. And this brings us to the fifth topic I wanted to go over, and that is why I believe you should not use member prefixes in your member variable names. And for this example, I went ahead and created a class contact information that has first name, last name, birth date, phone number, and ID in it. I went ahead and called the constructor with some arbitrary data in here, and then I assigned it to contact information here. And then I referenced the member variable birth date here, and this kind of demonstrates why I don't like using this m_member variable prefix. This doesn't really read that well. It's contact information.m birth date, and if it were to simply just be birth date, you know it's a member variable because it's defined inside of the class, and you use the dot operator. So I have an example underneath here. Let me go ahead and bring this up for you guys. And this shows a little bit why I think it reads a little bit better. And go ahead and ignore this postfix I threw up here. That's just so I didn't get like naming collision in this file. In a perfect world, that wouldn't be there. It's kind of gross. It goes against a lot of the concepts I'm teaching in this video. But if you look beneath here, we have this contact information dot birth date, and that simply just reads much better. There is no reason to use member prefixes in your code. This brings us to the sixth example I want to cover in this video, and that is how not to name your method names inside of your classes. For this example, I went ahead and created this user object up here, which has a email field, a first name, last name, and ID member variables. And then I went ahead and created this simple user service, which gets all users and finds a user by ID. Now, in the real world, a user service would probably have an API call that would go and talk to your backend and then pull down all the users or find one based on their primary key or ID in this case. And then for this example, I went ahead and newed up a new user service. and then I call get all users and find user by ID. I just pass in 1 here as our argument, so let's find the user where it would be 1. And the thing I don't like about these method names are it's redundant. We have user service dot get all users. We already know the user service solely deals with users, so it would suffice to do get all, or even shorten it more and just do all. And I have an example beneath here which demonstrates that. Let me go ahead and pull it up. All right, comment this stuff out. Okay, and so this example down here does just that. We now have all. So now it reads user service dot all, and this shows the same exact information we have up here, but with no redundant information in our names. It makes it a little bit more terse. Likewise with find, we don't have find by ID anymore. We know that it's by ID because the parameter is ID and it's of type number. So something to keep in mind, guys, when you're naming your method names, you don't want to put redundant information in there. It's much terser and easier to read if it's just all find in this example. Like just try to shorten things up, because the context that it's called in is what really matters. Like the context is user service, so we know it deals solely with users. And the last topic I wanted to cover in this is why you should avoid mental mapping with your variable names. And for this example, I went ahead and created this visual, it's kind of like visual demonstration of what we're doing. So we have a table which consists of rows and columns, and every cell in this table has an array. In this example, I just showed an array of numbers with 1 and 2. So I created a constant table of arrays here, and then it's an array with an array of numbers. And this is kind of like, you can kind of think of this as like row, column, and then the cell, which is an array in this case. So if you want to iterate through every single cell in this table, you're going to iterate through all of the rows first, and then all of the columns, and then every single number inside of the array inside the cell. And for this, we have our variable I, j, and k. And a lot of people like mentally mapping the variable I for the most outer array, the variable j for the middle array, and k for the one that's nested all the way inside. And I'm going to show you an example where I don't use those, and I don't use mental mapping for I, j, k, and I believe it reads much, much better. So down here, you know that I is the row index, so we know that we're actually iterating the rows here. And then I like to go ahead and say, what are we actually accessing with our row index? We're accessing the current row. So table arrays with the indexed row index will actually return us the current row. And then it kind of goes down all of the nesting from here. So now you're going to iterate the columns. We have our column index, which returns the current cell. And then we're going to iterate the cell array index. So that's 1 and 2. So I believe if you stay away from the I, J, K mental mapping for nesting, bear in mind this is only one specific example of mental mapping, and just use explicit variable names, your code definitely will read a lot better. When you visit this weeks, maybe months from now, you'll actually be able to understand your logic much, much better. I think if you were to read this, you might be a little lost in what's actually happening, but if you read this and you have this nice picture of the table up here, it's incredibly clear on what's happening. And that concludes this video on variable naming. Thank you guys for watching this entire video. I'm honestly impressed if you stuck through an entire video of this length only on variable naming. I hope to continue this series and cover a lot of mistakes I see in code quite often. So please like, comment, and subscribe. It helps me out a ton. Thanks, guys, and make sure you guys are deving daily.